We are going now to Crete. How many of you have been to Crete? Not very many. Ah, you must go. It's very, very beautiful. In Crete, one of the main reasons that people go is just to sunbathe and to have a lovely time. And there are lots and lots of tourists there now, but there's also wonderful archaeology. And there's a city there called Knossos, which was really the center of power of all the trading ships in about 1500 BC. So are you orientated into that? Now that was destroyed. That beautiful civilization which made such wonderful buildings, did such successful trading, was actually destroyed in the end by an earthquake. As often can happen, you know, nothing could really be saved. And so we get a hidden civilization for a long, long time, until a German archaeologist called Schliemann, who discovered Troy, the city of Troy that Homer had talked about, and he also had an idea that somewhere actually there must be the real Knossos, and it's spelt K-N, Knossos. And the story comes from there. So I'm going to tell you that first, and I'm going to start with what Homer said and how he described it. Out in the middle of the wine-dark sea, there lies a land called Crete, a rich and lovely land, washed by the sea on every side, and in it there are many peoples and many cities. There one language mingles with another. Among the cities is Knossos, a great city, and there Minos was king. Now that comes from the Odyssey, book 19, for those of you who read Greek or read Greek in translation. So, the myth of the killing of the Minotaur. The thing was that King Minos had enormous power even over Athens. And when we think of classical Greek and Greece, we think of Athens as being the powerhouse, don't we? Athens and then the famous war with Sparta. However, at this early stage, Athens was actually in lieu to Knossos, and they sent a tribute every 7 years. So the king comes in legend, in myth. Really and truly, it's a symbolic narrative. We don't know how true it is. It was told first by people who couldn't write things down. They were traveling minstrels, if you like, storytellers, and each one would tell the story in a different way. So eventually it was written, and that's where we get Homer. So the beautiful poetry that you hear started from very simple stories round the campfire, if you can imagine that. This is how it happened. So the story was, you see, that Minos was so powerful that he could really do what he liked. And the god of the sea, Poseidon, was his friend in terms of Greek mythology. And Poseidon gave Minos a beautiful bull, and it was a white bull, to sacrifice, for a sacrifice, to make a sacrifice, because that was what was happening in those days. But instead of sacrificing the bull, because it was so beautiful, Minos thought, I'm going to keep it for myself. You know, it's like when people get beautiful dogs, they don't want to give them up, do they? Just because they can't. We had this problem in England. After COVID, people couldn't look after their dogs, but they didn't want to give them up. And it was the same with Minos. And the story goes that his wife fell in love with the bull. And she got Daedalus, you know Daedalus the craftsman, the magic craftsman whose son Icarus fell to the ground. she got him to make a wooden bull, and therefore she was able to conceive, to make love to the bull and conceive a child by him. And the child was half man, half bull. And that was the Minotaur. And the Minotaur is going to be a very important figure in this story. Because, of course, when the Minotaur was born, Minos, the king, was furious and imprisoned the Minotaur, this half man, half bull, in a very deep prison under the ground. Now, the labyrinth is the way he imprisoned the creature, because it was made in such a complicated number of corridors, a bit like coming in here this evening. We didn't know what way we were going, you know, and somebody said go left, somebody said go right, and it was exactly like that, but imagine, it's all dark, so there was no light at all, and he imprisoned this creature at the bottom. And the creature, of course, was like all prisoners, ravenous and wishing to escape. But it couldn't escape because it didn't know the way out. And so, every 7 years, it was fed by 7 youths and 7 girls sent from Athens. So there we have cannibalism from the early days. And the monster was wild, fierce, destroyed anybody who came near. And that is the start of the story. Now the hero Theseus had come from Athens, and he wanted to put an end to all of this. So he said to Minos, I will kill this creature for you. How? How could he kill the creature and escape alive? What he did was, he was loved by Ariadne, who was the daughter of the king, and she made a very fine thread which he could tie to a rock at the beginning of the labyrinth and keep on his journey down, so that if he kept hold of the thread, he could get back to the surface. So that was his safety net, but he had to keep hold of it, and that's an important fact in the archetypal story. So Theseus goes down, he kills the Minotaur because he's a hero, and what do heroes do? They always succeed, don't they? And he managed to escape out of the labyrinth. But that was not the happy ending that everybody thought. Theseus was forgetful. He forgot 2 things. One was what Ariadne had done for him, and although she was his lover, he deserted her on an island on his way home to Athens, so he leaves her completely. He doesn't remember her and all she's done for him. And he had promised his father in Athens that if he succeeded in killing the Minotaur and stopping this awful tribute, that he would change his white sail on the ship for a black one. But he was so elated and thrilled with himself that he forgot. And the king, in his sorrow, threw himself over a cliff to his death. So you see, forgetting also comes into the picture. Okay, so there we have Crete. Now I want you to jump forward with me to the town near where I live. And I will tell you how I'm going to link up the 2 things as we go along. But let me describe the situation. So this town is between London and the coast. And that's quite important because trains go up and they stop at the town, it's called Crawley, and they stop on their way to London. And some of their cargo carried by people who want to make money is drugs. They're coming from mostly Holland, it was in those days, and they are stashed with plenty of drugs. So the young lads and girls of Crawley, if they were having a party, knew that if they met a particular train and went with some money, with their pocket money, they could buy drugs. And so Crawley became one of the first towns in the country where it was known that there was a drug problem. And that was because a psychiatrist there collected the evidence. He was surprised because so many people came with injection marks. And that was not expected in those days. We're talking back in the 1960s, 70s. And so what he did was, he went to the police, he went to the courts, he went to the social services, he went to his colleagues in the health service, and he said, if you get somebody coming with drug problems, would you tell me, so that we can gather up the information? And he did so well with this that he became very unpopular, because Crawley didn't want the name of a drugs town, which is understandable. Now, my part comes in this, that some of these people were treated along with alcoholics at the hospital there. And that was where I landed up working. And I did a lot of research, not so much with the people at first. I was sent off to their parents, and I would say, ring up and say, could I come and see you? And they would say yes or no. And if they said yes, I would say, how is Peter doing? How are they getting on? Did their treatment work? Are they still injecting? And the first person I went to was in dire trouble, because her son had been arrested. He was a drug addict who injected, and he had got a job in the parks department, looking after the trees and the grass. And the first day he was employed, he got a duck off the pond and said, come on, let's roast it and eat it. Well, you can imagine. And he was in custody that night. And I've never forgotten, you know, the awful feeling of this poor mum, single mother. She was doing her best. She'd done her best for this boy and the sister. Lo and behold, he was using drugs to this extent, and he was now going to come up in court. And then gradually, you see, what happened was, over the years, we got money from the Home Office, and that's the group in London who pay for all the court work and all the police in London and the country wide. And so we collected a lot of evidence of how people experience their addictions. And that's what I've got, some statements that people made. I'm not going to tell you long histories of what happened to them, but what happened on their way to recovery. Because we ran a group at the hospital every Monday night, 5 o'clock prompt. If you'd been once admitted to the group, you could come even if you'd left, and suddenly you felt, I know I'm going to have a drink. I need a drink. You know, it's terrible. My boyfriend's left me. I'm feeling dreadful. I know I'm going to have a drink. Or, I've had a drink. Now what's going to happen? I'm going to go to the hospital and that will save me. Because if somebody came and they had a drink, and every time we put the alcometer round to see, we couldn't test for drugs in those days, but we could test for alcohol. If anybody had had any alcohol at all, even low alcohol lager, you know, that has a little alcohol. Anybody with any of that in the breathalyzer, instead of being part of the group, one of us leaders, there were always two, we took that person aside into another room and we said, well done for coming. This is what we want. We want to see you when you're in trouble, but you can't join the group this afternoon. You can talk to me, and next week, if you want to come to the group, please come, no drink. And so that is how we managed to offer something to people that they really needed. You see, so that they could remember that if they were again drawn back, addictive substances, whether it's a behavior like gambling or pornography or simple things that people are addicted to, or whether it's something terrible like injecting yourself, it changes your mood, doesn't it? That's the point. It changes your mood. And so when you're in dire trouble, you don't want to feel that pain. And so you're tempted. And you don't remember. You think one drink won't hurt. But seems that one drink leads to another. So we gathered a whole lot of information about how people recover. And that's where the story sort of comes in as well. So I'm going back to a little bit of reading now, if you will forgive me. I'm saying that our environment today is filled with objects of addiction, whether they're chemicals or all too tempting behaviors that intrigue us and may be hard to abandon. Now, all of us could become addicted, and this is something that people don't usually say to you, but believe me, I've known people who've been bereaved and they've taken to the bottle. And there was a woman who was in our group who had had a little post office in the West Country, and that post office was attacked and robbed, and she had been not badly injured physically, but mentally she had PTSD, absolute horrors, and she took to the bottle. Again, it was alcohol, because of course it was so easy for her. Her post office sold it. It was an off-license. And so by the time she came to us, she was in a very pitiful state. And yet, she had had a life where you wouldn't have anticipated that. So, addiction. Lots of research in the last 20 years into who is likely to become an addict. And that's been done by someone in Canada called Edward Kantzian. And he's made a scheme saying, if you've had a terrible childhood, if you've been abandoned at a certain stage, if your parents have been using drugs, supposing your mother has been an addict of some substance, either drugs or drink, when you're in utero, then you've been exposed to a substance long before you're ever born. And if it's heroin, of course, when you're born, you have dreadful withdrawal symptoms. Do you know about this? The cry of the babies. It's a special high-pitched wail, very painful to hear. And they have to be given mild doses of methadone or heroin in that first week. So anyone, I would say anyone, is at a possibility of becoming addicted. It's not such a weird thing. And you see, I remember on holiday in the summer, we were in a hotel, and one morning a friend of mine found that her phone didn't work. Honestly, after breakfast, I cannot tell you the ruckus there was. Who can help me do this? Who knows about iPhones? Who can do this? No, I've got to find. And you know, she was really, I mean, she's a professor herself, and she's wonderful, but she's addicted to her phone. She can't give it up. And she's on a WhatsApp group, and it's often she who is telling things to people, you know? But to see her in this state, and so even if it's not an addiction that troubles you physically, it's still psychologically important. And I think that's worth remembering, that addicts are like, they are us all, but in a more extreme state. Does that make sense? You know, I think that's really my message, that why we succeeded in helping so many people is that we did not think they were different from ourselves, but they'd come up to a different path in life, and some of them wanted to go on doing what they were doing, and some of them wanted to stop. And some of them we had to say, when the time comes that you're ready, when you get a fright, when you get abscesses in your feet because of injecting, come back. So really and truly, it was a sort of lifelong thing that, you know, anyone in trouble could come, and they could be referred by their doctors or by the police. And we were an open service. Now, sad to say, because like everywhere, Britain is in trouble with money, that doesn't exactly work today. But at its time, it provided a very important service. So, what I've said is that lucky people can dabble in anything. Cocaine, which is very addictive because it's a stimulant and it makes you feel good. Amphetamines, Ritalin, which of course is given for children with autism, often with ADHD. But anyone can dabble and come out of it. You know, it just doesn't affect everybody in the same way. And that is a bit of a mystery. It's about what stage of life you're in, what your personality is. But I would never say that there was an addictive personality. It drives me crazy, because I think it is pushing people aside and saying, you are less than me. And I don't like that, because I've never been able to have therapy with someone with an addiction where I feel superior. I mean, often they're exceedingly clever people, and they're exceedingly resilient in life. They've managed perhaps to be heroin addicts for 5 or 6 years without being discovered. And then suddenly something goes wrong. I mean, I had a dentist, and he used to take stuff off his own shelves, of course. When life got tough, Valium was there. And so, you know, I have great respect for my patients. I do not look down on them. And with people who are working with drug addicts, this is my first message always to them, because you can learn a lot from them, as I hope I'll show you. Now, how are we going for time? I mustn't get caught up in this too much. Okay, now what I've said is, I believe that any of us could become addicted, but some of us may get tangled up in the labyrinth and find it hard to retrace our steps. Listen to this man telling an all too well-known story of bargaining with himself. I did try controlling my drink for a while. He was Irish, by the way. It worked to a degree, but it was an awful struggle. You only fail once, like I did, and you're back, all the way down. I did actually give up for a few weeks, but one night I had a Guinness. St. Patrick's Day it was. It's a wonderful Irish beer, which I'm sure you know. I thought, I'll just have 2. I had 3. The next night I thought, I had 3 last night, so I'll have 3 tonight. I learned that the best, indeed the only cure for a hangover, was another drink. It became a complete blur. So this is him looking back on how he relapsed, you see. So once you've become addicted to a chemical substance, you're always at risk. Your body has become accustomed for one time, so you are more at risk than anyone who has not had that experience. Then here's another guy who had another crafty way of dealing with things. When I couldn't get a drink and I had no money, I would shoot off to the doctor and be lying. And I would get tablets, and I would buy stuff. You see, anything, no matter what it was, I took it, as long as it changed my mood. I couldn't stick the pain of not drinking. I took an easier, softer method. I would use anything at all. Now this guy, he was again Irish, and his story was fascinating in that his parents had many parties, and they would go to bed, and little Guy would go round and see where all the glasses were with something left in. And so very, very young, he had alcohol in his blood. And it was not a family that cared for him. So he came to Britain and found it hard. You know, he found it hard to find work and didn't have a good start. And many addicted people are, of course, in that plight. So we had to really be a group for him. We had to be a safe place where he could come. And that was, and the group was not happy and lovely, I have to tell you, because some people would be saying, you've got to go to AA, others, which I will explain in a minute, others would be saying, no, AA is absolute rubbish, we don't want anything to do with it. And why did the doctor not give me? There were people shouting at each other, but really, I think we loved each other as well. You know, because someone would come and say one week, Dave, the plumber, died last week, have you heard? And it would not be somebody who was addicted at the time. It would be somebody who had drunk so much that they had destroyed their inner organs. And alcohol is an invisible chemical, isn't it? In that you don't know what's happening to your nervous system, the peripheral nervous system goes, your brain goes in the end, everything is affected, and yet there are few signs to start with. And so the group was passionate, you know, about protecting people because it knew that the alternative could be tragedy. And that really bound us all together and kept us going. Now, killing the Minotaur. Thinking about this, AA I've mentioned, and that is an organisation that started in America, appropriately enough, and the name of it, I think you don't all know, I discovered. It's called Alcoholics Anonymous. Have you heard of it? Could you just... You have. Does anybody not know what it's about? You do know. Oh, well, one or two. Okay, look, it's groups of people who help other alcoholics recover. And there are many groups. They call themselves fellowships. And it could be Narcotics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Sex Addicts Anonymous. What have I left out? Oh, Families Anonymous. That's the families of people who've had a drug user in the family. And Al-Anon is for people who've had a drinker in the family. So these are little groups. I mean, there'll be about this 2 rows of you. And they sometimes will have an open meeting and people like myself can go. And I just have to say, look, I'm Mary, I'm a researcher, and I've come to join you this evening. But they would say, I'm so-and-so, I'm a heroin addict, or I'm a cocaine addict. And they don't let anyone, you can only agree to the situation of never saying anything outside the group. They take no money, except what is enough for coffee and the room. So the government can't touch them, of any country. You see, all these little things that start up, and they're part of a system, the government can say, I'm going to cut your grant. So charities often go to the wall. But with AA and all of those fellowships, they don't go to the wall because they've got no funds at all. So there's nothing to play for. There's none of that, we're going to be better than the next one. And like if I were an addict and I was coming to Belgrade and I was worried I was going to start using cocaine again, before I left England, I'd say to my group, can you find me somebody in Belgrade, please? An individual. And if there's a group, there might not be a cocaine group, but there might be a narcotics group that had lots of, and then I could ring them up when I got here, and they could say, okay, Mary, if you're in trouble, let us know. So that it's a worldwide thing. and very, very powerful. And the interesting thing for you who are Jungians is that it had, as its starter, a great deal of influence from Carl Gustav Jung. It was he did not start it, that would be unfair, but he had a huge influence on a rich American who was one of his patients. Now, those of you who know about AA probably know the story, but I will tell you it again because it's got an interesting point to it. This guy was a financier from Long Island, and he'd had a problem with the bottle, and he went to Jung and stayed having analysis for a year. And by the end of the year, he was dry, and he felt very, very pleased and happy. And he went back to the States, and there he continued with his life. But he was also so wealthy that he could travel widely. And one year he landed up in Africa, and while he was in Africa, for reasons that I don't know, he started drinking again. So he contacted Jung and said, please, can I come back? Jung said, come and see me. But when he came to see him, the answer was no to analysis. I cannot say that it will help you. What you must do, and this is a strange part, is there's only one hope for you. This is what Jung thought. Put yourself in a position where you can experience a religious conversion. Now to us, this feels very strange. Because, you know, in London we had Billy Graham who came as an evangelist from the States, and we thought he was completely bonkers, but he had a huge following. And so there was a group, luckily, in New York called the Oxford Group. And that group wasn't just bonkers. What it did was it helped the rough sleepers. It went out. They were Christians. They were started in the 1930s, and they were a close-knit group, but they went out and helped people who were sleeping rough, and particularly addicts. And this is what this guy, Roland, went and did in New York. And it was through him that one of the founders of AA had the experience that it needed people to help one another. That was the way people could stay if they were recovering addicts. That's an expression, isn't it? Recovering addicts. You're not clean, you're not dry, you're a recovering one. They could stay in the state of recovery if they banded together and helped one another. And it is incredibly moving to go to the groups, because, you know, you meet people in my little town, you meet people from every walk of life. It wouldn't be many more, perhaps, than this group here. Not huge group, but they would, one person every time would say, I will take the chair. And taking the chair means you tell the story of how you gave up alcohol. So that's all you have to do. And others then join in or they don't join in. It doesn't matter. You can stay silent. And in our hospital group, I will tell you that there was a man called Tony. He said nothing for several months. And one night, I was in the car park, and he said hello, because he knew me as a group leader. And I said, Tony, don't you like speaking in the group? And he said, look, it's my wife. You know, she's rejected me. I'm dry as bone. I don't touch drink anymore. But she can't forgive me for the life I've put her through. I spent all the money. She had to move house. My children are furious with me. My daughter says, I'm not going to have you at my wedding. It's a terrible life. I can't say any of that group. I would burst into tears. And I said, look, Tony, you've done it now. You've told me that's absolutely fine. You come to the group, say nothing. You can imagine what happened, of course. He started very gently to say things to people, usually people that were in trouble. So you see, it's magic, isn't it, how people come together on an occasion and something happens. And that's how healing happens, don't you think? Wouldn't you agree? Any sort of healing. And that's how it happened for them. So I would say that it needs that sort of thing to really keep people on the straight and narrow if they've been seriously addicted. And that's something worthwhile when you come across people in your work, which you inevitably will do. Now, AA have an expression, and that's called rock bottom. Can't go any lower. But also, they cover their back. They say, people might have many rock bottoms. They might say, I thought that was my rock bottom. No, it wasn't. I got even lower. But rock bottom, I think, is like killing the Minotaur. That person has said, I can't go down any further. And if they're addicted to either alcohol or barbiturates, the sleeping pill, they really need to come into hospital because they're going to have fits if they're not looked after very, very, very carefully. Heroin, bad flu. That's all you'll probably get. Cocaine, it can be managed. Most things. But they will need huge emotional support. I'm going to read you what, this time it's a woman speaking. Now this is what she said about her time when she finished drinking. I was friendless because I'd drunk myself out of friends. Nobody wanted to know. I was very isolated, desperately lonely. You have to start from scratch. I still had a roof over my head, but I had no self-respect. I couldn't function, and I was full of fear. Everything frightened me, especially people. I was riddled with guilt, shame, and remorse because of my behavior. So you see, it's both physical ill health, the come down from alcohol, all of the awful symptoms that you get when you're stopping, but it's also this dreadfulness. You've messed up your life, and you've probably not got much money anymore. And so what she actually did was she got somebody from AA to pick her up in a car and take her to a meeting every night. But she had to do something. She had to arrange for a babysitter to look after her boy, who was then quite young. Now let me tell you, I know this, I know her still. Her son is in charge of an accident and emergency department in a London hospital. And that proves to you, you see, that even though family members can be deeply hurt, deeply, they can actually recover. People are resilient. And I think it was because she stopped when he was at that age. I mean, she's lovely. She's a wonderful person. It happened that we were at the same university at the same time, we discovered. And she was able to somehow or another retrieve the situation. And if you get into the field ever of working with addiction, that is what you're doing. I mean, it's very inspiring, really. Some people won't make it, but many do. Now, just to put you in the picture of what people think about groups when they go to addiction groups. This is the negative view. I didn't like Narcotics Anonymous at all. I didn't like the way they operated. I'm not going to sit in a circle when there's 2 or 3 people that are ignorance, basically. It just gave me a headache. I don't need that. I need to be treated with respect and the delicacy which I require after so many years of using drugs. Now here's somebody who could join and did join the group. A member said, but you know, if you don't pick up that first drink, you won't need the next one. and the next one, and you won't get drunk. And suddenly the penny dropped. I didn't have to get drunk. It was a relief. It was most wonderful, like a revelation, because I thought that I always had to drink and get into dreadful trouble. You see, that's the madness of extreme alcoholism. People lose their sense that we would have in our normal days. It was pointed out to me that I actually had a choice. It was like the freeing of the soul. Those first 2 weeks were extraordinary. I felt that it was my spiritual experience. So there she is, you see. This is what she felt. Now, Jung said, people become addicted because they're lacking something spiritually. And people nowadays, certainly in Britain, find this very difficult to take. Because I hear to my horror on the news the other night, Britain is the least religious country of any in the world. I tell you, I was astonished, because there are plenty of Muslims who are going to their temples, and Hindus, and there are plenty of Christians, and there are plenty of Orthodox Greeks and Russians in London. However, this is the picture. But it's the word spiritual that puts people off. And I have an understanding of it, which you may or you may not accept. I say that being spiritual is having a sense of meaning in your life. That you've got a sense that you've got some significance. It may be significance only to your mother, to your father, to your child. It may be significance because you can do something with your hands. You can create pottery. It may be that you can make film. You can capture the moment and capture something magic that hasn't been seen before. And therefore, you have a talent, and in a way, that gives you a meaning. And of course, it means you have a duty. Because even if it's only to your mother, it means you have a duty to keep in touch with her, however infuriating she may sometimes be. So that it's this thing of meaning, you see, where I think Jung was right. That people become addicted because they lost that. And when we're young, and when I was young, we go all over the place exploring, don't we? Trying different things. Am I going to be a career person? Am I going to be rich? Am I going to find a rich partner? Am I going to go travelling all over the world? What am I going to do? Am I going to be an isolate? Am I going to go to Mount Athos? You know, there's lots and lots of things. What sort of life am I going to have if I live here? Am I going to be a party animal? Yes is the answer. And you see, Jung would say, we have many parts to ourselves, and this is where, when you're young, you experiment, and it's fine. And gradually comes a sense of maybe where you want to go, where you want to be, what meaning your life has. So I would say that Jung was right, but many people find it difficult to take that in. Now, about holding on to Ariadne's thread, have I got time? Is it all right? Okay. Why have I said that it was difficult for people to hold on to the thread? The thread is therapy in any sense. It might be a hospital ward. It might be a group of people arranged like AA. It might be a therapist. It might be a pal that you've got who knows your secret, that you can tell, look, I'm in danger. But it is therapy for that person. Why is it difficult? Well, I can tell you why it's difficult for people with an individual therapist, because I am one. It's difficult because when people become strongly addicted, they usually have to hide it as a secret, don't they? They're going to get caught otherwise. If it's illicit drugs, if it's cocaine or heroin, they're going to get caught and they're going to be in trouble. So it has to be secret. It probably has to be secret from the family too. So they have kept a secret to themselves, and that means that they tend to become very isolated. Do you know somebody who was admitted to the hospital, a woman, who had kept her job until the day when she collapsed? Her boss didn't know that every night when she went out of the work, she was shaking so badly that she had to get to a shop where they sold booze, and she had to buy a bottle of wine. And she had to open it and have a drink before she got in her car to go home. So, you know, this is the thing, that it's not easy for people who've been secretive and who've had to hide away their habit from others to suddenly be able to talk freely to anybody. They've got out of the habit, that's what I tell them. It's just you're not in the habit. You don't, you know, it doesn't matter if you don't say anything much. Just come along, check in, show me that you want to come every week or whatever we arrange. Like people said in the group, it doesn't matter if you don't talk. Presence is the thing, isn't it? That we make that move, that we do attend whatever it is we said we'll go to. So that people find it difficult with an individual. I think they also find it difficult in a hospital because so many people abscond, don't they? They leave before they're cured, you know, they leave. There are rehab centres too. Do you have them here? Where people can detox. Yeah, well, people are often hiding bottles on the way in, you know, under a bush or something, so that they know that when they come out, they can jolly well pick up the booze again. I'm talking a lot about alcohol. It's lovely because it's so available to us all. And, you know, it's such a common thing. And we're all familiar with the lovely feeling of that first drink and of the second and the third. So it isn't easy. People lose the thread and they forget. As days go on, they think, it was last year. Oh, it's a year and a half. I'm okay. I'm fine. But listen to what this man says. Now, this is alcohol again. He'd been several years sober. Then, the most astonishing thing happened. I had been in the habit of getting a lift home with a colleague of mine. He worked in London. He was a journalist, a very high-up journalist, actually. He's great. Hundreds of times we must have crossed the same street going to the car park. All that I remember is that one beautiful July evening, when we finished fairly early, we were crossing the road. We got as far as the refuge in the middle of the road. On the opposite side of the road, there was a pub. For some reason that I cannot fathom out to this day, I said, let's go and have a drink. And we did. And that caused him to have a lapse into drinking and relapse. Unfortunately, you see, if somebody has an experience like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to go all the way down again. They may be able to drag themselves back out of it. Or they may say, I need to go to my doctor or whoever it is that they've told about their addiction. But he came back to the group at this point. He actually had to have a spell in hospital because there was something wrong with him, and I can't remember what it was. It was kidneys, liver, something. He was very unwell at that point. But then he came to the group, and he was a great asset to the group because he was so coherent. He could do the job for us. You know, we trusted him. And he could really get the group going. I mean, we would drift in, you see. Somebody having made me a cup of tea, I would drift in late, and that would be fine. It was very democratic. So, now, what was my last thing that I was going to read to you? Yes. Let's suppose that we've got somebody who has lived many years sober. If they are in Alcoholics Anonymous, they will have gone through a process which is called the 12 Steps. And that, you may know a little bit about it, so forgive me if you know already. The 12 steps fall into a group of 4, really. The first thing is, you recognise that you can't control, you personally can't control the object of your addiction. You can't do it. You've tried many times, you can't. Second thing, you've hurt yourself and others in the time that you were addicted. You acknowledge it, and you say to yourself, I know I've done it. So that's the second step. Third step, if it's appropriate, you go and say sorry to whoever it is, your friend, your wife, whoever. But not if you're going to make the situation worse. The last thing is, you're going to keep on trying to help other people that are in trouble. And it doesn't have to be alcoholics, doesn't have to be addicts at all, but that you are part of the human civilization that is helping someone, not just living for oneself. And it is so easy, isn't it, to live for oneself? It's so easy. Around Christmas time, you know, I look and I think, we are all decorating, you know, we're all buying presents for everybody, and we're thinking, what can I get for so-and-so? What will they think of this? What will they think of that? It is so easy to do that. But for people who've been there as an addict, it is helpful for them to remember others, especially at times like January. See, usually they're okay at Christmas. It's after all the festivities are over that they're in grave danger. Now, I'm going to read you to finish a lovely bit of a letter that one of our people, he was a drug user in his teens, and he's writing not to me, but to his therapist, whom he felt had given him a great hand up in life by telling him right at the moment that he was needing, that he needed to sort of sort his life out. He had particular difficulty because his brother had been killed in a fairground accident. I don't know what in the fair had gone wrong, but something. And of course the family was grieving all through his childhood, and the mother in particular. So this guy, his name was Richard, and I can say that because he has died now, but he lived to a good old age. He says, addiction takes many forms, but basically it's about avoidance. So that's how he saw it. People want to avoid something. Whether it's your drug of choice is heroin or shopping or compulsive masturbation, the dynamic is the same. It's a distraction from the pain inside. In many ways, he says, it's the culture that's addicted. I don't know if we'd agree with this. We're bombarded on all sides by the pushers of various substances, all guaranteed to make us feel better. Well, that's what adverts do. The flight into addiction is always an option. Then he says an interesting thing about himself. Our giving up addictions has to be placed in a meaningful context. So it's not just something you do yourself. He got it, didn't he? He got the secret. We have to rediscover our essential goodness. We have to honour our vulnerability. I mean, what a phrase. We are all vulnerable, but we don't like to think about it, do we? We like to pretend that we're fine. But he says we have to honour our vulnerability, which means, of course, we lead lives that we can manage, that we know we're not good at some things, so we don't jolly well go on trying to do them, or whatever. It is what makes us human. We need a reason to live, a reason to be grateful for our existence. We have to learn to care for other people as well as ourselves. And he says, I'm still in the process of learning to begin to do this. And what he was he was a dad, and he was a stepdad, and he went to live in London, and he became a gardener to a bit of railway line that was deserted, and so there was lots of wildlife there, animals and plants, and he was employed by the London Council to look after that particular stretch of railway. There was no train going through anymore. And they discovered he was such a good character and such an amusing man that in the end school groups used to come of children, and he would show them round and show them what happened to us in Britain, that Edward Beeching in the 1960s cut the railways and spoiled our communication with one another. And it is still to this day in a terrible mess. And you know, my husband and I lived in a village in the North Country. It was wonderful when there was a little train. And of course Beeching came in and said, it's not going to make money. These things have to be cut. So he told them a story about Britain and what can happen in politics because people are too greedy, but he also showed them plants and how he looked after, and the plants that maybe had some medicinal properties, and that's the way he lived. And he lived, I think he was in his 60s when he died, and it wasn't a death through anything to do with drugs. So, look, I hope this has given you a little feeling that we have the Minotaur, who is killed, we have the climbing up through the labyrinth, which is difficult, and we have the necessity not to forget. Thank you.